much DNA did Henry VIII share with his wives? Were they too closely related for comfort before their marriages, and might this explain some of their fertility problems? Let's look at the Tudor family tree to find out if these marriages were just a bit icky and if they breached biblical laws or the religious rules of the 16th century Catholic Church. The issue of Henry VIII and his wives' shared bloodlines is something I see come up quite often in the comments under my videos about them, as people blame their inter-cousin marriages for any childbearing issues they, and indeed other historical figures, may have had. I've long thought that this is far too simplistic an explanation for the Tudors' fertility problems, which I already have a video on that I'll leave linked for you, and that people overestimate how closely linked Henry and his queens were. So let's take them one at a time to see how they were blood related to him and each other, and whether his marriages would have been considered inappropriate by the laws of the Catholic Church at the time and by modern standards. We begin, of course, with Catherine of Aragon. Now, Catherine was Henry's widowed sister-in-law at the time of their union in 1509, having previously been married to his brother, Prince Arthur, and that relationship alone was enough for the Church of the day to consider it wrong, as it placed them well within the prohibited degrees of affinity. These degrees differed from degrees of consanguinity, which means blood ties, and could be created by marriages, intimate relationships, and even baptism. To explain it better, I'm going to read you out a paragraph from a 1974 book called Marriage Litigation in Medieval England and written by R.H. Helmholtz. Helmholtz explained that in 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council had reduced the prohibited degrees of consanguinity and affinity from 7 to 4, but the remaining prohibitions still covered a very broad range of possible marriages. It meant, for example, that everyone descended from the same great-great-grandfather was barred from marrying anyone similarly descended. The method was to count down each line of descent from the common ancestor. If this took 4 steps or fewer to reach the man or woman on each side, the relationship was consanguineous. Any marriage between the descendants was invalid. Affinity was the tie between a man or woman and the blood kin of the person with whom he had become one flesh. Normally, this impediment was a result of marriage, but it was also the product of any sexual intercourse. If a man once had sexual relations with a girl, he could not thereafter marry her sister. They were barred by the first degree of affinity, and so with the first, the second, or the third cousins of any woman with whom he had carnal dealings. We'll circle back to this problem when discussing Anne Boleyn, her sister Mary, and their cousin Katherine Howard. In addition, there was the impediment of public honesty. This barred marriages between the relations of a man and woman who had exchanged verba de futuro but had not ultimately married. And last, there were the purely spiritual ties, contracted with the immediate kin of a person's sponsors in baptism or confirmation. Under this impediment, for instance, a man might not marry the widow who had previously stood godmother to a child by his first wife. So had Henry and Catherine been following the Catholic rules of the day, they wouldn't have been allowed to marry, purely because Catherine had previously been wed to Henry's brother, though of course she claimed that teenage marriage had never been consummated, and so the bond of affinity was never actually created. Was there a problem of consanguinity between her and Henry, though? Did they share common ancestors who should have made a marriage illegal? As far as I can tell, and bear in mind that doing family trees that cover several centuries is notoriously difficult, so I apologise if I missed anything, the closest way in which Henry and Catherine were blood related was through their shared descent from John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, who was a son of King Edward III. Henry was John's great-great-great-grandson on both his paternal and maternal lines, with each stemming from Gaunt's third marriage to Catherine Swynford. See my video on that scandalous medieval royal duchess, by the way. She had quite the life. Catherine of Aragon, meanwhile, was John's great-great-granddaughter through his second marriage to Constance of Castile, and also his great-great-great-granddaughter through his first marriage. This put the couple within the prohibited degrees of consanguinity, as we only have to count back 4 generations for Catherine to reach John, but they were hardly closely related. Still, by the laws of the day, Catherine shouldn't have married either Arthur or Henry Tudor. But of course, rules are made to be broken, especially if you're royal, and they were able to get dispensations from the Pope to allow the weddings to proceed. But do I think sharing John of Gaunt as an ancestor explains the problems Catherine and Henry had in producing living children? No, absolutely not. I think this is far too distant a relationship. To offer some perspective on the matter, bear this statistic in mind. Even first cousin marriages only increase your chances of getting a genetic disease from 3% to 6%, though that's obviously going to get worse if your family engages in repeated cousin marriages over multiple generations. And Henry and Catherine were nowhere near that closely related before marriage. In fact, Catherine's own parents, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, shared far more DNA, being second cousins, and they had plenty of surviving children. Henry's parents, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, were also within the prohibited degrees due to their descent from Gaunt, yet I rarely see anyone complain that they were too closely related to wed. I would warn anyone who views such marriages as incestuous to pause for a moment and consider their own family trees too. Most people can't trace their genealogy back at least 4 generations with no gaps, or even if they could, they haven't done so. There are plenty of people out there who aren't even sure what their granny's maiden name was, or who don't know who their biological father or grandfather or great-grandfather, etc. was. If everyone could trace their lines like this, I think it might shock a lot of you just how many of you are the products of unions between distant cousins, and that's not even allowing for the fact that affairs and adoptions might lead to people entering into relationships with people that even the best family trees wouldn't show were blood related to them, when in fact they are. A lot of us are from families who lived in small towns and villages in rural areas for many generations. It is therefore unavoidable that we spring from limited gene pools, as most people didn't move around a lot in the era before cars and trains. It would be naive to think that our family trees don't fold in on themselves at a certain point, and most likely many times over. Just see my video on how we're all descended from Emperor Charlemagne if we have any European blood over the past 1200 years, which is almost everybody on the planet at this stage, to learn more about the phenomenon of pedigree collapse. If you have Irish ancestry, by the way, and would like to learn more about your family tree, check out my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, which is designed to help you trace your Irish lineage from the comfort of your own home. It brings together a huge amount of knowledge that I've gathered up over the years from doing my own family tree, along with tips and tricks I've picked up along the way to help you to overcome genealogical roadblocks. It's available from Amazon as an ebook and a paperback, and I update it every 6 months or so to keep the information fresh. It's also got some lovely reviews from people who have already used it, thank you if you're one of them, which you can of course check out before deciding if it's right for you. I'll leave the link for it in the pinned comment and description. If you sign up to my free newsletter on my website, historycallingofficial.com, you'll also get 2 complimentary downloads, one of which is all about interviewing your family members about your genealogy. Again, the link is below. Moving on to Henry's second marriage to Anne Boleyn, which occurred in 1533 after he failed to get an annulment for the marriage to Catherine from the Pope, and so split from the Church of Rome, formed the Church of England under his own control, and had the annulment issued by Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. Again, there was a problem of affinity. This time, the issue arose from the fact that Henry had slept with Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn, before embarking on the relationship with Anne. This alone should have put pay to any chance of marrying her, and honestly, if Henry was trying to claim that he and Catherine were too closely related because she'd been married to his brother, it was a bit rich to be trying to get a dispensation to marry Anne, which he did initially before breaking with the Catholic Church when he'd slept with her sister. His distant cousin, Cardinal Reginald Pole, was not above pointing this out to the king in a blistering letter sent in the spring of 1536, which reads as follows. Now what sort of person is it whom you have put in the place of your divorced wife? Is she not the sister of her whom first you violated, and for a long time after kept as your concubine? She certainly is. That point is disputed, by the way. We don't know how long Henry and Mary were involved. How is it then that you now tell us of the horror you have of illicit marriage? Are you ignorant of the law, which certainly no less prohibits marriage with a sister of one with whom you have become one flesh than with one with whom your brother was one flesh? If the one kind of marriage is detestable, so is the other. Were you ignorant of this law? Nay, you knew it better than others. How do I prove that? Because at the very time you were rejecting your brother's widow, you were doing your utmost to get leave from the Pope to marry the sister of your former concubine. Ouch. Henry, however, didn't mind double standards as long as he was on the right side of them, and when he was dumping Anne and having the marriage annulled, the prior relationship with Mary was one of the excuses he used. Talk about shameless. What about consanguinity, though? Were Henry and Anne related by blood in what would have been a forbidden match if the Catholic rules of the day were being followed? The short answer is no. Though both were descended from Edward I many times over, Anne's closest descent was as his 6th great-granddaughter, while Henry was, at best, his 6th great-grandson. This made their shared bloodline distant enough even for the exacting standards of the 16th century. Again, I don't think we could say that their daughter, Elizabeth I, needed to worry about her parents sharing too much of their DNA, even if she'd known what DNA is. Nor do I think we can in any way attribute Anne's 2 miscarriages in 1534 and 1536 to some sort of genetic problem brought about by having become pregnant by such a distant cousin. Moving on to Jane Seymour, who Henry married just a couple of weeks after having Anne executed in 1536. Like Henry and Catherine of Aragon, she was descended from Edward III, this time through his son Lionel of Antwerp, Duke of Clarence, making her King Edward's 6 times great-granddaughter, while Henry VIII was his 4 times great-grandson. This did not create a consanguinity problem, yet Henry got a dispensation to marry her based on being related in the 3rd degree of affinity. This appears to have been to cover the fact that Jane shared a great-grandmother named Elizabeth Cheney with Anne and Mary Boleyn, both of whom Henry had of course slept with, and so this placed her within the forbidden degrees. But the dispensation itself does not specify what the problem was, and it's possible there were other links caused by affairs which we don't know about. I have also seen the claim made online that she and Henry were both descended from a man named John Stourton, albeit through 2 different wives. I haven't been able to confirm that, however, even if they were, I think it would have been distant enough to not cause a problem with consanguinity. Anne of Cleves was Henry's 4th queen, who he married in January 1540. She was also the only one, apart from Catherine of Aragon, to come directly from royal stock. They were not close blood relations, however. Their nearest shared ancestors seem to be their great-great-great-great-grandparents, Bernabo Visconti and his wife Anna Beatrice della Scala, who Henry descended from via Catherine of Valois and Anne descended from via her maternal grandfather, Albert III of Brandenburg. Thus the pair were distantly enough related that it wouldn't have raised any concerns about consanguinity, and when Henry annulled the marriage after just 6 months, this was not one of the reasons he gave, preferring to focus on his own unwillingness to enter into it in the first place, the fact that it had apparently not been consummated, and Anne's youthful engagement to the Duke of Lorraine's son, who she'd never even met, and who, funnily enough, ended up marrying Christina of Denmark, Duchess of Milan, one of the women whose hand Henry had sought before he wed Anne. Wife number 5 was Katherine Howard, who was one of Anne of Cleves' ladies-in-waiting and who Henry entered into a relationship with whilst still married to his German queen. They were married in July 1540 after he'd had the Cleves marriage dissolved. Catherine was a first cousin of Anne and Mary Boleyn, and this on its own should have created an insurmountable obstacle in the shape of 2 affinity links. Of course, this is Henry VIII, who had slept with a pair of sisters already, so sleeping with their cousin was nothing really. At best, Catherine was a 7th great-granddaughter of Edward I twice over, giving her a bloodline connection that was way too distant to matter when it came to marrying King Henry. Last but not least, we have Catherine Parr, who Henry married in 1543, less than a year and a half after having Katherine Howard executed, and stayed with until his death in January 1547. Catherine Parr, who was actually Lady Latimer at the time of their union, thanks to the title she had gained from her second husband, was the great-great-great-granddaughter of Ralph Neville, Earl of Westmoreland, and his second wife, Joan Beaufort. Henry was their great-great-grandson through his maternal grandfather, Edward IV. This made the king and his new queen related in the fourth degree, and would have been an impediment to the marriage had Henry still been doing what Rome told him. There was also a possible problem with affinity, as there is a theory that Catherine Parr was the goddaughter of Catherine of Aragon, as her mother worked in the household of Henry's first wife when little Catherine was born in around 1512. Of course, Henry had annulled the first marriage, so we could argue that even if Catherine Parr was Catherine of Aragon's goddaughter, it wouldn't have been an issue. Interestingly, it was Catherine's fourth and final marriage which had a major affinity problem thanks to her union with Henry, for she wed Jane Seymour's brother Thomas in 1547, just months after the king died, making her the sister-in-law of her dead husband and the aunt as well as the stepmother of he and Jane's son Edward VI. Had England still been loyal to Catholicism, a very good dispensation would have been needed to cover such a complex web of marriages, and I can pretty much guarantee that it wouldn't have been forthcoming, because Edward VI's protector, Jane's other brother, was not happy that the king's stepmother had married his uncle. So let's wrap this up. Henry VIII was not, in fact, very closely related by blood to any of his wives, and certainly not closely enough that it would have impacted their ability to reproduce. Due to his propensity for marrying ladies from the English aristocracy instead of foreign royal princesses, he was actually very good at wedding well outside his immediate gene pool, with the result that the nearest joint ancestor he shared with any of his 6 queens was a great-great-grandparent. Most of the objections which were or could have been raised to his marriages usually had to do with links caused by affinity rather than consanguinity. Furthermore, no one that I'm aware of at the time raised any concerns about his blood ties to his wives being too close for comfort and having the potential to impact the health of their children. Why would they? Many aristocrats were far more closely related to their spouses, and their children were fine. In fact, although the Tudors sometimes get criticised for marrying their distant cousins, there are in fact many instances of other English royals from other houses marrying much closer blood relations, and no one really seems to bat an eyelid at it. Think of George I and his first cousin Sophia Dorothea, for instance, or George IV and his first cousin Caroline of Brunswick, or Queen Victoria and her first cousin Prince Albert. They all successfully reproduced, sometimes at considerable scale. Victoria and Albert had 9 children and no known miscarriages. And though Victoria passed down the gene for the blood disorder haemophilia to 3 of her children, this was not because she married her cousin. She already had the gene, which seems to have been a spontaneous mutation in her, as the disease is not present in her ancestors. By the by, I got that information from reading a scientific article on that couple and haemophilia. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, so if you believe that info to be wrong, let us know in the comments, please. The idea of what is acceptable and what isn't has also changed over time. As mentioned in that quote from the Helmholtz book, the Catholic Church used to ban marriages between anyone related in the 7th degree, then dropped it to 4 in the year 1215. Nowadays, it's legal to marry your first cousin in a great number of countries, including the United Kingdom, despite the fact that first cousins are related in the 2nd degree, and we know that it does increase the chances of genetic problems, especially if done generation after generation. As for the reasons why 4th and 7th degree bans existed in the first place, one explanation for it is, I think, that our ancestors understood that mixing very close blood relations was a bad idea due to the potential impact on the children. Just think of the famous Habsburg jaw seen in the Spanish royal family after many years of intermarriage. There was also biblical support for banning some marriages. Leviticus chapter 18 verses 6 to 18 gives the most complete list and bars a man from sleeping with the following blood relations: his mother, daughter, aunt, sister, half-sister and granddaughter. I think it should have banned uncle and niece marriages too, by the way, as they share the same amount of DNA as aunts and nephews, but that isn't specified. We also see the Bible extend the ban to certain bonds of affinity, so that a man is also not to sleep with his stepmother, stepchildren, stepsisters, daughter-in-law, step-granddaughter, his brother's wife, this seems to be while the brother is alive, and by marriage or his wife's sister while the wife is still alive. There was also a ban on sleeping with a woman and her daughter and or granddaughters. Presumably, these rules were to deter serious family arguments and eventual societal breakdowns. If you've ever seen episodes of trashy talk shows like Jerry Springer, for instance, which did sometimes feature stories like these, then you'll know that our ancestors were onto something. Sleeping with your sibling's spouse or other in-laws can absolutely destroy families. Cousins aren't on the list though, and there are instances in the Bible of them marrying, see Jacob and his wives for example, while other bonds of affinity are actually encouraged. Despite what Henry VIII wanted to be true, Deuteronomy actually says that a man should marry his dead brother's widow, just as Henry had done. So there's nothing here that blocks a marriage in the 4th or 7th degree, yet the Church maintained that such unions were void without a dispensation for centuries. Why? Well, I think it was in part to prevent powerful families consolidating their power further by blocking marriages between its members and forcing them to merge with other groups, and in part to give the Church political power as well as religious. It also allowed Rome to charge fees for giving out dispensations, so it was a great money-making scheme. By the way, I have to say that I think the whole concept of dispensations is ridiculous anyway. What's the point in having the rule if it can just be set aside like that for those considered special enough or rich enough? It's a real slap in the face to those expected to abide by it, and I actually think that over time it damaged the Catholic Church's credibility and authority because the double standards were so glaring, with even Philip of Spain and his niece getting a dispensation, though admittedly that one was given under duress. There are modern-day bans on anyone related in the 1st degree marrying, and there is no such thing as a dispensation for it. You cannot legally wed your parent, sibling, half-sibling, grandparent, aunt or uncle, and that's that. It's a hard rule, no exceptions. So I think it's time to let go of the notion that Henry VIII's children by his wives were inbred in any meaningful way that would have affected their health, or that their parents were engaged in incest. They weren't. Given the evidence showing how distant their blood relationships were, we can see that the marriages between Henry and his wives were probably no more icky than a lot of the marriages in our own family trees, and they shared hardly any of their DNA beyond the normal amount that all humans share. The Tudor marriage that had the closest blood relationship was actually Mary I and her first cousin once removed, Philip of Spain, but they had no children. Philip's other marriages, as I've already alluded to, were to much closer relations though, and if you want to see what truly bad intermarriages can do take a look at his son Don Carlos of Spain to see an example of it. I'll leave my video on him linked for you. If you're interested, by the way, the nearest common ancestor for Henry and all his wives was Edward I of England, who lived between 1239 and 1307. Even Anne of Cleves was descended from him as his 8 times great-granddaughter, and without him, the whole Tudor dynasty would never have come to be. I hope you enjoyed that little trek through the Tudor gene pool. Please do consider giving the video a like and a hype, as this is entirely free and it really helps me out. And if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button and switch on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my uploads. Again, that's free. You can become a YouTube channel member too by clicking the join button under videos and getting members only posts and badges next to your name in the comments. You can also join my Patreon site at patreon.com/historycalling, where I share bonus material like early access to ad-free videos and exclusive podcasts. I'll leave it linked for you. Let me know in the comments if you think the genetic links between Henry and his wives were enough to make things nasty. And if you want to learn more about DNA and history, check out my videos on how the Black Death affects you and why you're almost certainly descended from Emperor Charlemagne. I hope you find them illuminating, and until next time all, keep learning.